of ways, I understand that money does not make you rich. When I was in my 20s, late 20s and early 30s, I became a millionaire. And it went straight to my head. And, you know, when you have money, you think your IQ goes up. In reality, your IQ goes down, you know. And it was fast cars and even faster women. And I was a millionaire. I was a bon vivant around Waikiki. Now, I don't regret a thing. It was a lot of fun. But the more money I made, the more stupid I became. Anybody ever had that problem? So that's how I learned. I made a lot of money, and it made me instantaneously poor because I still had poor habits here. You see this right here? This is financial literacy or financial intelligence. If you cannot read a financial statement, you cannot tell what's happening. You cannot read. And what you don't see here is how the rich make more and more money because of this one little loophole here. You know, that's my account. You know, over here you hit 335,000 in income, and your tax rate keeps going up. Over here you hit 335 in income, your income rate, tax rate goes down. The laws are written for the rich by the rich. Period. So, very quickly, I'll go into a financial statement. And this is the basis of wealth here. So what happens to most people is they say their house is an asset and all this. My rich dad said, your house is not, whether a house is an asset or not, has nothing to do with this thing here. It has to do with the most single important word in business, and that word is called, what's the word? Cash flow. It's cash flow determines it. So, very simply, when I was 9 years old, my rich dad said an asset is something that flows money into your pocket, and a liability is something that takes money from your pocket. Just because your banker or your accountant says your house is an asset doesn't mean it's an asset. So when I read a financial, I see something listed here, and then I see whether it lodges up here. Now, if it doesn't lodge up here, then it must be going this way. It's going out the expense with no income. Does that make sense, you guys here? That's a very simple way of looking at it. Now, taking it one step further, this is where the confusion sets in, is very simply because if you buy a house for, let's say, $100,000, and you get an $80,000 mortgage on it, you put $20,000 down, the problem is your house is listed both asset as well as liability, and that's where the confusion starts. It's listed in both sides, and that's the problem. So the thing here is this, and by the way, the word mortgage comes from the French word mortir, which means death. You know, so that means you're engaged until you're dead with the house, and staggering. So let's say you buy this little green house here. Okay. The way you know it's an asset or liability is, let's say I use it as a rental property, and after paying all taxes, you know, taxes, insurance, and expenses, and all this stuff, I make $100 a month. It shows up over here under income of $100 a month. Now, if let's say I have a tenant who trashes the place, doesn't pay me rent, takes me a year to evict the bugger, immediately that house becomes a what? Liability. So the house can be either asset or liability, but it's not because it's an asset or liability listed here. What determines if it's an asset or liability is income and expense. So what makes a person struggle financially is that what they do is they go out and buy a house, and they call it an asset. So you have a house mortgage over here. You buy a car, you call it an asset. You buy yourself a Gucci suit, that's called an asset. You get a gold watch, it's an asset, and all this. But they're really what? Liabilities. And so what happens is, I can tell if a person's rich or poor or middle class very simply by reading the financial. I can look at the financial and see if money's coming in and money's going out, this is the cash flow pattern of a poor person. It's not how much money you make. It's how you spend your money. I know a doctor here in Arizona, he makes over $500,000 a year. But he spends $525,000 a year. It comes in and it goes what? Out. He thinks like a poor person. Okay. The average middle class person, because they have a job and the bankers like people with jobs and all this, they get all this stuff. This is their cash flow pattern. They have huge long-term liabilities. They're illiquid. Okay? And this is the cash flow pattern of the great middle class who think they're rich. My rich dad said, it's just because you live in a big house, have a nice car, and wear nice clothes, doesn't mean you're rich. You could be broke, more poor than the poor person. So the difference was, for me, was that I spent my life learning how to acquire assets. So I don't need a job. The object was never to work for money. It was to learn to acquire assets that put money in my pocket, either stocks, bonds, real estate, businesses. So this is the cash flow pattern of the rich. The way to find out how rich you are is this: is let's say you're married, husband and wife. If the two of you stop working, what happens? See, if my wife and I stop, income still keeps coming, because it's not dependent upon us working. The average person, all their assets, they realize if they stop working, are really liabilities. As my rich dad said, assets feed you. If you stop working, liabilities eat you. And the reason they can't stop working is because the liabilities eat them. So the definition of wealth is how long can you survive without working? And it's measured in days or years in time. So when I retired in '94, my wealth was infinite. In other words, I always had more than enough money coming in that was greater than my expenses. And that's a way of thinking. Would you please take 30 seconds to discuss that thing on cash flow?